This story follows on from the baptism of Jesus narrative that we looked at last Sunday. So it's not surprising that we hear some of these same themes again in today's reading. The story appears to be a straightforward account of what this writer of the fourth gospel calls a sign. However, the use of that word ought to alert us to the fact that the story is not actually about what happened to the liquid in the water pots. Rather, the emphasis is on this person, Jesus, who caused something to happen at that wedding breakfast. But the subtext here is even more significant because this is a seminal, foundational gospel story. Its purpose is to underline that something new is happening here. And the presence of Christ is the catalyst for that, as Peter reminded us last week. So here are some of the symbolic theological messages behind this text in this chapter. The text refers to water pots, 6 water pots. Now in the Hebrew scriptures, 6 often represents imperfection. There's a deficit here. The old needs to be replaced by something better. And the writer is telling us that the gospel, the good news, is that something. The water pots are described as being made from stone. So nothing unusual about that, except that the reference is a throwback to Moses receiving the 10 Commandments on stone tablets at Mount Sinai. The old covenant is giving way to a new covenant. The stone pots are empty. That doesn't sound out of the ordinary either. But the empty pots point to a religious system that's become dry and no longer able to give or to sustain life. And the contrast is stark. Jesus came to give life in all its fullness. The pots become filled with wine, pointing forward to the words of Jesus in initiating the communion meal. This cup of wine, is a new covenant between God and God's people. So the writer of this gospel is using this story to highlight that change is in the wind, which is why today Meryem and I are talking about transformation. So drilling down into this text, where do we see this transformation? Let's start with the obvious one. In this shame-based culture, which the story is set, running out of wine at a wedding reception would have resulted in awful humiliation for the bridal couple, for their parents, and for the whole village for generations. Now, rather than this event would be remembered for its outstanding vintage. Shame is transformed to honour. Next, the text indicates that Jesus' disciples believed in him. We read in verse 11. So whatever their understanding of Jesus was prior to this event, it changed as a result of their experience in this event. And as an extension of that, the inference is that the readers of this gospel, us, were invited to reflect on Jesus' question to the disciples, which are recorded in the other 3 gospels: who do you say that I am? You and I are being invited to interrogate our view of Jesus. And following on from that, I'd suggest the notion of faith and religious observance is also being transformed from following a set of rules to following Christ. Law gives way to grace. And I'd also propose that this story confronts a common modern perception of the Christian faith. It transforms that stereotype from something tedious and duty-based to a life characterised by fullness and joy and celebration. And so many of the biblical scholars make a comment something like, Jesus sure knew how to party. So the gospel is about transformation, but do we really want that? Because transformation requires change, and change threatens our sense of self. True spiritual encounter changes your politics, your attitude towards money, your use of time, your relationship towards foreigners and the weak, your attitude towards war and nationalism. You are a citizen of the big kingdom now. Be prepared to have a very different lifestyle afterwards. If you're not ready to change, don't seek out God, wrote Richard Rohr.
Recently, we returned from our annual holiday at a seaside town in New South Wales. Just as in all previous years, I went armed with a load of novels because that's the time of year when I catch up on reading works of fiction. As I became immersed in each novel's imaginary world, it dawned on me that the plots I appreciate most, the books that I don't want to end and that linger with me long after the last page, are always the ones where the main characters experience significant growth. The novels where the characters are stuck or stagnant, where there is no evidence of change, no revelations, no insight, no learning from mistakes, no growth in wisdom or character development, these are the books that either frustrate or bore me. I need the character introduced in chapter 1 to not be the same one I bid farewell to as I close the book. He or she needs to be somehow deeper, fuller, wiser, stronger as a result of what they have experienced within the layers of the unfolding plotline. In these books, the characters don't just go through stuff, they grow through it. And as a result, I am enriched and inspired by the growth and transformation I witness in them. I love transformation stories, stories of water being changed into wine, which has subsequently made me wonder, would my story be a story of transformation? Would yours? Do we just go through life, or have we grown through it? Is there evidence of water being changed into wine in our stories as individuals, families, and as a faith community? The more I understand what it means to be a follower of Christ, the more I am coming to realise that an encounter with God is not supposed to leave me unchanged. As Greg has already reminded us, to do life with God means risking change. It is impossible to authentically hang out with God and stay the same. The Spirit of God is constantly seeking ways to break through and turn water into wine in us and through us. The Spirit is always inviting us on a journey of transformation. The journey is not just a mere superficial makeover though. God is seeking to do a complete renewal of us, our priorities, our values, our passions, and even our pain. As most of you would have heard, Desmond Tutu died recently, and what a story of transformation his life was. I came across these words from his book, God Has a Dream. I write these words because we all experience sadness. We all come at times to despair, and we all lose hope that the suffering in our lives and the world will ever end. I want to share with you my faith and my understanding that this suffering can be transformed and redeemed. Our God is an expert at dealing with chaos, with brokenness, with all the worst that we can imagine. God created order out of disorder, cosmos out of chaos, and God can do so always, can do so now, in our personal lives and in our lives as nations. This is the deep transformative work God wants to do in our lives. The invitation is there. It is here now. What do you notice within yourself as you hear this invitation? Any hesitation or resistance? Why might we resist wine and cling to water? Resistance to God's invitation to transformation may be due to false thinking. I have heard it said that the Spirit of God seeks to comfort the disturbed and to disturb the comfortable. When might our thinking need to be disturbed? When we hold certain distorted beliefs. For example, believing that I am just fine the way I am now. Lord, I'm content being a member of your club and I enjoy the membership privileges that this entitles me to. Don't ask me to change. Don't challenge me or stretch me. I realise some of my values and practices are not in the likeness of Christ, but I'm comfortable with them. I respectfully decline your invitation to transformation. Water is just fine. Or believing that change means effort, and I'm suffering change fatigue from living in a COVID world. I am longing for a season of sameness, not transformation. Lord, how about I take a rain check? Maybe next year after the storm has passed and my water has settled. Or believing that I'm too old or too young to change. Maybe believing that others need to be changed, not me. Lord, I can happily give you a list of the people in my life who need transforming. Or perhaps believing that being transformed means doing a spiritual self-improvement course each year, or ensuring I maintain a daily discipleship program. This is enough change. I may be water, but at least my growth plan has upgraded me from still water to sparkling. Do you relate to any of those false beliefs? If so, can we hear the voice of Mary echoing through the years, declaring, "They have no wine," and the Spirit inviting us to now call on Jesus and to do whatever he asks? Alternatively, resistance to God's transformation invitation may be due to disturbed thinking that needs to be comforted. Perhaps believing that I am so broken and so damaged that God wouldn't know where to start. No wine to be made here, Lord. In fact, I don't even have any water. I'm an empty jar, a desolate place. Or believing that God has given up on me because of all the times I was challenged to change and then just reverted to old patterns. I wouldn't blame God for forsaking me. I've forsaken myself as a lost cause. Maybe some people were never meant to be wine. Do we relate to either of these false beliefs? If so, can we hear these words of comfort from another of today's lectionary readings in Isaiah? The Lord says, "You will no more be called forsaken, and your land will no more be called desolate, and you will be called by a new name. You will be called my delight." The Spirit is inviting each one of us to transformation. Can you hear it?
I'm going to conclude by treading on some dangerous ground. I believe that the Western Church is getting close to actually transforming Jesus. This is a quote: "The metamorphosis of Jesus Christ from a humble servant of the abject poor to a symbol that stands for gun rights, prosperity theology, anti-science, limited government that neglects the destitute, and fierce nationalism is truly the strangest transformation in human history," said Rayan Wilson. Now, Wilson's an American who follows the Baha'i faith, but I see American religious extremism creeping into our Australian culture. And these images on the screen from Australian streets would seem to support that. Now, I'm not talking here about legitimate right to protest or about having good reasons for not getting the jab. What I am talking about is dragging the Christian faith into ideologies that I don't believe properly represent the truth of the gospel. They are not good news. So if we want to be truly transformed and see ourselves as authentic followers of Christ, let's be careful. Jesus came to change people and systems and relationships and institutions. He came to change us. You might recognise these words. "He doesn't like being tied down," said Mrs. Beaver. "He's wild, you know, not like a tame lion." "Then he isn't safe?" said Lucy. "Safe?" said Mr. Beaver. "Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he is good." Now, if C.S. Lewis was right and Aslan is good, we have nothing to fear. But do we have the courage to pay attention to and respond to where the spirit of Aslan is blowing in our lives?